Okay, guys, what a week it has been in the cannabis industry. There's been corporate turmoil. Hold on, let's fix a couple things. I wish everything was that easy. Let's do one more thing here. It's just me today, me and you, I guess. So let's get in tight. Okay, now that we're settled in, let's have this conversation. A bunch of you have reached out asking me what's going on with the Canadian market, what's going on with cannabis overall. The reason for that is because some of the big dogs are taking some big hits this week. It's actually been happening throughout most of the beginning of the year. It's a reflection of the last year of business and the copious amounts of capital that have been deployed in the cannabis industry, and the one thing that no one ever predicts for, and that's the amount of change and unknowns that we're going to have to deal with for the next 5 to 10 years. So we're gonna have a quick heart-to-heart. This is born out of the fact that one of our savvy shareholders went back and pulled up a bunch of tweets. I wasn't saying anything too aggressive. I try not to talk too much about our competition in a public forum. I think it's unprofessional. And quite frankly, I'm rooting for all of these companies to succeed. I think there's enough room in the industry for all of us to find a place in the market. I don't relish anyone having a hard time or celebrate anyone's failures, but there are some tweets, there's a couple of them here that were sent in that were just screenshots of things I'd said in the past. And yes, I have been critical of the companies that are essentially forming partnerships, building and expanding for the sole purpose of driving headlines. You may have been able to read in that other tweet, one of the primary things I would often point out is to what end? What is the point of all of this expansion, and does it bring value to the shareholders? Is it making the company more nimble? Is it allowing it to adapt and participate in the market and be a part of the expansion? Or is it simply just growing for the sake of growing and appeasing investors? And you all know I've had investors come down from Canada dozens of times. We've had partnerships from all over the US come tour the farms and look at the different operations, get a feel for my experience and what we bring to the table. And over and over and over again, the one thing that has the most wow factor is these large grows, particularly indoor grows, because they look like science experiments. I can't tell you how many times we've had people out to the farm and they look around and go, well, this is like a real farm, you know, dirt and dust and, you know, tractors moving around. Like they're used to seeing these surgical, almost sterile environments indoors. And there's room for those, for sure. There's a market for high-end indoor cannabis. But one of the things that we know to be true is that as the market really starts to find its footing, there is a huge section of the market that needs to be supported by low-cost, high-yield outdoor cultivation. And that's one of our specialties. Why do we know that? Because we've been at this for 12 years now. We understand the cost of growing indoors, and I don't even think the full consequences of growing product indoors have hit our industry yet. When these kind of organizations that are stewards of the environment really start to dig in and take a close look at how much waste is going on in indoor cannabis cultivation, I think the cost of operating those businesses is only going to increase, making life more difficult for big companies. So it's never been our strategy to expand for the sake of expanding. In fact, it's our goal to be as nimble as possible for the next few years so that we can adapt to these ever-changing market trends. And I talk all the time. You've heard me 1,000 times say, in the decade I've been doing this, and in the time I've been saying that, many years have gone by, so now it's more than a decade. And I'll still tell you that even though I feel like I'm one of the most knowledgeable people in the space, there are still so many variables that we can't possibly predict how this is all going to shake out. But one thing I know for sure, if you bring in more capital than you can thoughtfully deploy, and you run more press releases and build more market value than your company can sustain, eventually you're going to run into trouble. We all know that. That's something that is just inherently true across all industries. But one of the things that's hard to get around is the excitement in cannabis and the overreaction to changes in the industry. And a lot of times what it requires is that we just wait and be patient and find out how it's going to sort. So I want to talk about a few of the headlining issues. I want to be direct to the point. Again, I'm not pretending like I have a crystal ball and these guys should all be calling us. I'm just simply pointing out the fact that these big dog companies, particularly up in Canada, having these issues has implications on the rest of us, particularly those of us here in the US who are expecting a legalization change or a federal rescheduling, particularly as we head into another major election cycle. We're out raising capital and we're talking with folks about our investment strategy and building out pro formas, and we're having to defend against some of the things that are going on in Canada. So I felt like it was really important for us to have this conversation. So let's dig in a little bit and look at a few of these companies and what they have going on and ways that they may need to make adjustments in the future or things they may have already adjusted. And that may be why we see so many of these executive teams being shaken up. So Aurora is the big one. Obviously, Terry Booth stepping down. That's probably a polite way of putting it. That's a big blow to the industry from the standpoint that Mr. Booth has been around a long time. He knows the space. He is obviously someone who has built a multi-billion-dollar company, and it's not you would never do that or pull that off without having a high degree of business acumen and a strong understanding of the cannabis industry. I think the big thing that's going on inside of the cannabis industry, like inside the culture, is there's this accusal that a lot of these big companies are culture vultures. Culture vultures. That's hard to say. The idea there is that they don't understand what's going on in the culture. They come from outside industry, Target or some other outside facility or Microsoft or Amazon execs, and bringing them in. And the idea is that if we've got this guy with this amount of capital and this plan, we can't lose because it's marijuana. There's a huge disconnect between the culture and what it takes to run a business and build products that are liked and respected in the industry and those that are just operating with a high degree of business acumen. So one of the things we've harped on for years is I think we're probably the best balance of the two. In the old days, it was too many tie-dyed stoners and too many people in suits and ties trying to fit in, and it was a huge clash. And we were the group, and you've probably heard me say this before, that was wearing a suit with tie-dye socks and underwear on underneath. We understand the culture. We're a part of it. We helped pioneer the culture that is recreational and legal cannabis, played a big role in medical cannabis. So we definitely cut our teeth and understand what's going on in the culture, but we have the professionalism and the people surrounding us to sit and talk with the institutional lenders and those that really, really do need to be a part of the growth of the industry. So getting back to Aurora, there's a little brag reel for us. But getting back to Aurora, Terry Booth is no longer the CEO of the company. Now, what we're going to see this quarter is almost $1 billion wiped off the books. That's a big number. There's a lot of losses happening on a quarterly basis, and it's always going to happen in an industry that's growing this much and dealing with this much change. But $1 billion being removed from the books is something that it implicates all of us, and it speaks to a very important issue, and that's not accounting for too much goodwill. That's not overvaluing assets, and particularly that happens during acquisitions where the excitement and expectation is that if their company is doing X and it was merged with ours, which is doing Y, we've got this massive result. And in the end, neither of them seem to hold that value. So we're dealing with two primary issues here with Aurora. It's a write-down and it's an impairment. An impairment is on a fixed asset. It's basically reducing the book value of a long-term asset that is just not holding the value that they thought, or I'm not going to pretend to know exactly why that is, but that is a big one. There's almost $200 million in impairment that's being pulled from the books. And then you've got write-downs. That is from short-term assets. Think of that as packaging and supplies that are typically used up or gone within a year. There's a $700 million write-down coming for Aurora on their books. That is a obviously large number, and it has a big impact on their valuation. So those kind of things, those are the landmark changes that cause shareholders to reach out to companies like ours and ask, what's going on? Is there anything that I need to be worried about, or what should I know about our company? Are we looking to see something like this? And this kind of harkens back to the fact that we're small, we're very nimble. We haven't raised as much capital as these companies are losing in a 24-hour period for the most part. So we are staying very nimble, and it's one of the reasons we're so heavily focused on the brands and the intellectual property. It transitions well. It's very, very lean for us to operate as a company. Obviously, we've got some real estate holdings and other activities more specific to the industry than just intellectual property and branding. We are asking the majority of our partners to take on the most significant risk, and that is building out their infrastructure, building out the majority of their grows, or licensing and leasing their grow space from us so that they're responsible for handling what they do well, and we provide the brands and the resources to get product into the market. Now, there are some issues with that, which brings me to Tilray. Tilray's layoffs, however creatively spun to their shareholders or to the market as an attempt to point themselves on a shorter path to getting to profitability, you read between the lines, there's probably a bit more to it than that, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. One of the things that we're dealing with here is an industry that's reacting to having overspent and overcommitted to the production of their own product and not found adequate supply lines or means to get their product into the market. And that's one of the big concerns with Tilray. 75% of their production requires somebody else to bring it to market for them. Although people are using that as a knock against Tilray, I think that's one of their bigger advantages, is that not everything is dependent on their operation. And yes, that could create some bottlenecks, but the burden that is put on one company to try and be good at every single thing is very, very difficult. And we're taking a totally different approach in that if we're lean and nimble and have the ability to get in and out of multiple markets very, very easily, we don't run the risk of having to sit down someday and report that, our Q2 financials are going to be losses of $40 and $50 million. We just don't have that model set up. We are intending to build one of the biggest brands in the world, but we're going to do it slowly and methodically in a way that doesn't require us to do that. And quite frankly, doesn't put my head on the chopping block every quarter. So that being said, expansion capital is crucial. Everybody's out deploying funds and spending at a rate that makes profitability something that I think is further down the line than most would expect. But, for years we saw companies like Amazon deploy this strategy, and for whatever reason, everyone thinks that that's the way to go. And I appreciate that, and we will operate with a similar mentality in some respects when it comes to production and build out and infrastructure improvements for the core of our operations. But the primary objective here is profitability before we go out and raise $30, $40, $50 million. Turn away money, but we have positioned ourselves extremely well to be able to tell an intelligent, well-crafted story born out of proof and experience to the U.S. market when people are really starting to look into deploying funds in the U.S. market. That's a little convoluted and a little messy, but I'm trying to be really, really honest and just speak to you guys about what I'm seeing in the market and how we're adapting or how we've positioned ourselves to kind of avoid some of those pitfalls. So, moving on to a couple of the other highlights. I'm sure you saw that Whoopi Goldberg's company is also done. They pulled the plug on it entirely. Snoop's brand down in California is really struggling. I don't know how much longer that's going to last. There's companies like, Hexo and a couple of others who have parted ways. MedMen, their CEO is gone. One of the founders, in some regards, a brilliant mind in the cannabis space. But again, the growth and changing expectations and rapid fire deployment of capital makes for a really difficult process to try to maneuver. And you're seeing a lot of people who built multi-million, in some case multi-billion-dollar companies going by the by because it's just gotten out of control. So I think we're at a time in this industry where the honeymoon phase of give me a good deck and a good idea and blue sky and we'll go get you whatever capital is necessary. We'll see a little bit of that happen in the US, particularly if there's a rescheduling here in this next election or something exciting happens in response to the next election. We'll see a frenzy for a little while, but I think there's going to be a lot more caution of how monies are deployed in this space. And that's interesting because the US market is going to be the largest market in the world. And when the doors are fully kicked open, it'll be interesting to see how these companies that are dealing with these struggles in Canada transition and participate here in the US, or if smaller companies that are a little more experienced and nimble and have been laying behind the shield of some of these other companies watching this all shake out, don't jump out to the forefront. That's my expectation that a number of us will, but we'll see how that plays out. I just want to circle back to the point of this video. It's not to point out how all these companies have done things wrong and they don't know what they're doing. I left off 5 or 6 smaller companies that are actually facing litigation or have been accused of being a Ponzi scheme, and a number of these businesses that are just flat out fraudulent. I stuck to the folks who I believe are legitimately building good quality businesses and have intent of being around for a very long time. I'm just pointing out the struggles, and I'm using it as an opportunity to highlight the fact that while we don't have as much flair and why we aren't chasing the same headlines, it's due in large part because of our experience. And we are definitely taking our time, and we are going to do this the right way. I appreciate all of you. I hope you're having a great week. We've got another video to be released that is talking about the launch of our new vape line. I think you're going to really appreciate that. So look for that in the coming days, probably early next week. So to those of you that are sending out emails of, hey, should I cut bait and run? Should I be buying more? Those decisions aren't for me, and this certainly isn't the forum for me to be sharing that information. But what I will say is that, yes, the cannabis industry has some struggles. We are going to continue to see these wild swings in excitement from the market and concern inside the market. And I think the roller coaster is really just getting underway because the U.S. market is going to produce some very, very exciting companies, and there's going to be a number of busts as well. So we're going to see this change. This is going to be a 5 to 10 year ride of seeing how the market reacts to a number of changing environmental factors, legal factors, everything. It's just a maturation process. In closing, I hope nobody takes this as an attempt for me to rub these companies' noses in the dirt or try to come across as if we don't have any of these problems or we will never have any of these issues. The industry is changing really, really fast. I think the only thing we should expect is this roller coaster to continue. When or if there is a significant legal change here in the US, it's my hope that a lot of us who have been operators here in the US for a long time have been able to watch what's going on in Canada, learn from their mistakes, and avoid falling into some of those pitfalls in order to grow at the rate of explosion that I think we're about to see. So you will see us participating in some of these things. We will continue to expand the core of our production. We're going to refine the brands. We're going to add new products. We're going to form new partnerships in specific categories that I think are going to surprise a lot of people. That's all tied to a bigger strategy that has us tightly bound to being as nimble as possible and being around long enough to reap the benefits of a successful business in the cannabis space. So, am I worried about the industry? No, I think the industry is going to explode and do extremely well. The individual companies and some of the players are going to be casualties of this process. There were some CEOs this last 12-month period that lost their jobs. Really quality people that know what they're doing in the space that were probably given an impossible task, and some of them that deserve to be fired. Again, I didn't go into a lot of the companies that were involved in nefarious activity and just blatantly breaking the law and or fleecing people for their money. I don't think that this is a forum or a place or I'm the person to deliver that message. But when it comes to the big dogs and the things that are happening in Canada that are inevitably going to affect our ability to build businesses, raise capital, and just generally be in the space, I think it's important that we talk about those. So nothing personal in this. I'm not making recommendations to buy or sell or make any changes to your holdings, but consider the fact that this is something that's going to continue, and we're going to see a lot of rise and a lot of fall from a bunch of different companies, and it's our objective to ride that out and position ourselves to be a global leader in the space. So hope everyone has a great week. We'll talk to you next week. Take care, guys.